Welcome to Leaders and Laggards.
Welcome everybody to episode 13 of Leaders and Laggards. I am Jeff Custer and I'm facilitating the discussion that we're going to have tonight. And welcome, gentlemen. It's great to be back together. With me tonight, Dave Swenson and Ken Riches. And I think, to me at least, I think we have just a fascinating topic that should be really valuable, I think, for listeners that are in leadership roles, especially those that are frontline supervisors, frontline managers. I think is something that they deal with every day. And where I came up with this topic and I like to talk about, back in 2015, there was a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And one of the main themes in that book was this concept of the daily whirlwind and how leaders get sucked into the daily whirlwind and can lose sight of other things that they need to do. And so that was really the basis of what I wanted to talk about tonight and get your guys' perspective and a little bit about how you've seen that and how you've worked with people on dealing with being in the whirlwind. A couple questions like our format always is. The first question I have, what is the whirlwind? And what evidence have you guys seen in relation to the whirlwind in the stuff that you've done in your careers? So, Dave, you want to start us off?
It was interesting when you brought the topic up. I mean, I'd heard of the book, and I had to do a little research. I'm completely, if I got to be honest with you. But what I found was that how they define the whirlwind in the book is maybe a little different than how I'd define it. And I would just kind of more concisely say that whirlwind that maybe we're talking about is the life that a lot of managers are living when they don't opt to live with priorities and build a team, right? And that's that whole trying to get everything done yourself. And boy, you're so busy, you don't even have time to breathe, let alone prioritize something. And so, it was interesting this week, and I spent some time with my son out in Wyoming, and the family took me to see a horse race on Sunday for Father's Day, and first time I'd ever been at a horse race. But the point of the story is that I had bet on a horse in the last race, and they gave you the stat sheet, and it just looked like a winner. And so I bet on him, and the horse led for so much of the race, and then just ran out of steam towards the end, and actually ended up in last place. And I thought, what a great visualization of what I see so many times with managers who maybe were great single performers. Now they're in a role where they're supposed to lead a team, and they're still trying to do something like that, accomplish a job accomplished, rather than putting together the team that'll actually get them through to that long marathon that they're now in.
Yeah. Ken, how about you?
Yeah, and I think, to kind of build on what Dave was saying, I think it's, it's your day-to-day job. It's the things that must get done to run the business. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been involved in projects and in new product development. If your organization isn't really set up for new product development or for projectization, then you're perturbing the day-to-day operations. And it's a lot of times it's just like pushing a rope, trying to get your things done in the mix of the day-to-day things that have to go out the door, whether your deliverables a service or whether it's a product or whether it's running a power plant.
Yeah, I think so. I just listened to what you guys say. I think it's so true. It's kind of that busy everyday things. And it's just so consuming. And Dave, I love what you said about individual contributors making that transition to leadership. And they try to use the same skills that made them the superstar. And those things just don't work. And they can get caught up in that whirlwind. When I talk to new leaders, I try to tell them that, as individual contributors, there's certainly almost 100% focus on tactical things. But as they move up in the leadership world, even higher and higher, a bigger percentage of their life needs to be strategy.
Right.
And so that frontline leader's in that, I think, really unique position where they're sucked into today. But I always kind of say this, you got both feet pretty firmly planted in today, but you got to figure out how to get one foot into tomorrow once in a while. So, that's to me what the whirlwind is. So I think helpful advice for people, how does somebody that's in that situation, how do they break free of that? Ken, how about you help us with that?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to focus on accountability and to have metrics in place for the really important goals that the organization needs to achieve. And I think in the book, or at least in a summary of the book that I came across as I was researching this, is they recommend an 80% focus on the day-to-day and a 20% on your wildly important goals, they call them, your WIGs.
Yeah.
And I know that through the mentoring and some of the things that I've done through the Project Management Institute and other places, that what I really encourage organizations to do is to, if you can carve out and spend some time on the strategic on a regular basis, then do that first. Because if you do the day-to-day and then you have your strategic items at the end of the agenda, the odds that you're going to have enough time to really actually do justice to the strategic side of it is pretty minimal. And so I really say that organize yourself so that you put your strategic one or two goals at the forefront, and then focus on your goals.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Dave, how about you?
Well, I guess, continuing with my theme of my last comment, I think if your goal is to break out of the whirlwind, you've got to realize that your job has changed a little bit. So if you were a superstar individual contributor, great, that got you to the point where you're at, but that's not going to get you to the point where you probably want to be. And you can't rely on thinking that you're going to be able to manage your way out of this either, because typically when you're managing, that's with known inputs and outputs and trying to get the best results with those things. So you're going to have to realize that your job, if you really want to get out of having a whirlwind of unwelcome surprises, right? You're going to have to start building a team, because you can't do it all yourself. So my suggestion would be figure out how to build a team around you, figure out how to develop the leaders around you, figure out how to start delegating and developing people so that they can do some of the things that you maybe shouldn't be doing because it's not at your level anymore.
Yes. Yeah, that was one on my list. For me, first, it was, I think, just the concept to recognize that it exists, to understand I'm in it. And I think if you don't do that, your chances of getting out of it are pretty slim if you don't even know you're there. And so it's really a self-awareness of when you're getting too sucked in. And I think it's a mindset of saying, okay, I know I can't be sucked in. So I've got to be like what Ken said. I've got to figure out what am I going to prioritize things. And then Dave, what I would add to you said, delegate, figure out what things are not at my level, what things can I delegate. And then I just add to delegation, are there those things I think all of us could find that I could just outright eliminate? What doesn't need to be done? So I think we all kind of are on that same train of thought around, there's some pretty good things people can do to break free of that whirlwind.
I thought, and following on with what Dave said, I think that one of the things that I've observed a lot in the organizations I've been in is that typically it seems like the organizational leadership is operating at about one level, what their real level is. You have VPs acting as directors acting as managers, managers acting as supervisors. And it's really critical that your organization is set up and that you understand what the roles and responsibilities at each of those levels are. And that's one of those things that I think really does truly start at the top.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I've seen organizations that do exactly what you talk about, Ken, where everybody seems like they're working at least down a level. And, a lot of times I've seen this in organizations where one of their things that they'll do over time is they'll eliminate frontline administrative support.
Mm.
Because, we've got all these fancy technology tools. We don't need to have administrative people. Maybe you've heard that.
Well, yes.
And so a lot of those people, maybe they don't all go away, but a lot of them go away. And now you have work that still needs to get done. And it's the frontline supervisor, the frontline managers that's next in line to do it. And so they end up spending their time working on administrative things, not at that right level that you guys are talking about. I think it just nailed that.
Yeah.
I always kind of thought when you think about that, in a really, really effective organization, you got people pushing to work up a level, because that's how they learn and grow. I'm learning and growing how to do director things when I'm a manager, not working on administrative things. I think it's an interesting observation of really healthy organizations. So maybe kind of similar, but what things would you guys identify as traps that those type of leaders need to watch out for that are going to keep them sucked into this whirlwind? What are the traps that they should really watch out for? Dave, you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. So I'd say a couple of things that are common is don't wait for a good time to start making this change, right? People wait for that time when they'll have more time because it's more stable, right? Well, that's never going to come. So don't wait for a good time. Also, don't expect that there's going to be an easy button that you can push. And that means don't expect that you're going to go to a couple hour online session or even an offsite session for 2 days and come back and things are going to have changed. Also, I'd stray people away from benchmarking what others have done, right? This is your journey. This is your team's journey. You really need to figure out how to homogenize the improvements and growth internally. So figure out what works for you. Don't wait and realize it's not going to be simple.
Yeah, that's great. Ken, how about you?
Yeah, I think some of the key things are making sure you don't have too many goals. If you have too many goals and you consider those important, if there's too many, then nothing becomes important. And then when you do pick your goals, I think it's important to make sure that your goals at whatever level you are in the organization are actually supporting the goals at a level above you. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time getting the traction and the focus on those goals that you need. As I think I mentioned in the first response, having some, or maybe the second question, having some performance metrics. And I think it's important to understand, especially when you're working on your goals and looking for improvement within the organization, it's important to have leading indicators and not lagging indicators. You want to find out if what you're doing is going to work, and if not, in the agile type frame of mind, it's fail fast. So if you're not getting the results you want, then you should be changing what you're measuring or changing what you're doing so you can verify that you're going to get some progress. Accountability is a big one. Is make sure that your people and your teams are accountable. And I mentioned earlier, one of the responses is to segregate some of your time to have time for tactical and strategic. Even better is if you can set aside a weekly or bi-weekly meeting that focuses strictly on the strategy side, and then drive those meetings and making sure that you have specific deliverables, you're addressing problems, the accountability, barriers, and you're walking out of those meetings with actions to make sure you're continuing to make progress.
Yeah, when you talk about having too many goals, it makes me think, I used to have a boss a long time ago, and his scorecard had 24 lines on it. And I used to kind of tease him and a little bit. I was like, well, what's really important on here? We can't focus on 24 things. And he really struggled with that because he says they're all important. And just exactly like you said, Ken, when you have that many things that are all important, none of them really are. You really don't know where to focus. So, and a couple of things I would add to what you guys said as far as traps is, I think that we've talked about this in past episodes about fire drills. And I think that you run this risk of letting routine things become fire drills. So how do we make sure that we stay out of fire drill mode? I Another thing, I don't remember if you guys mentioned this one here or not, but the demands are just unending. It never stops. And so one good thing that I probably struggle with, probably other leaders listening struggle with, is you have to learn to say no. Just no. Ken, I think it ties to your picking goals. What are you going to focus on? And you can't say yes to everything. And so learning to say no, practicing saying no. And like I said, I think I struggle with that. And it's something I have to work on, because I think we a lot of times want to please people. And so you just say yes, and I can't do that. That'll keep me out of the whirlwind. And
I
then,
know I came across a quote just here recently where, had listened to a brief video, and one of the things they say, and there's you can say no without coming across as mean. I mean, it's can be, it's like, a really good way to do is to say, well, not at this time, or you know what, that's a really good idea. Do you mind if I bring somebody else to the meeting that might be better adjusted, able to answer that question for you, so that you don't let accept the monkey on your back for something that is not within your wheelhouse or not important to your goals.
Yeah, I think the phrases I've been using more and more lately are, I'm really focused on this, and I tell a person, this is what I'm really focused on, and I just can't take anything else on right now. And I think it's gone over. I think you kind of get into your thing, Ken, where it's not like, oh, I just don't want to ever see you again. I don't want anything to do with you, but I'm going to prioritize on this. So, I think one of the things I don't think you guys have some really unique perspective on this question that I didn't send you ahead of time, but I think you'll be able to help. So I think about this. Think about that frontline supervisor. Maybe they're in a manufacturing plant and they're out on, they're out supervising people on the line, or kind of in that kind of scenario. The people they supervise are busy making stuff.
Yep.
And Dave, you talked about delegation. And I'm that frontline supervisor, and you here are a fancy S3 consultants come in and say, you should delegate. And what do you say to them when they look at you and say, look at my workers, who do I delegate to? Because I've been in that situation, and I think it's a difficult question to answer. So I'm really curious if you guys have any thoughts around that.
A level or two before we have that conversation, right? One of the first things I encourage clients to do of any size is let's figure out how to plot your team and figure out who is on your team. And what I mean by that is let's figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah.
And if you come at it from a disc standpoint, that's fine. We can have a conversation around that. But if you learn how to understand your own strengths and what to look for in others, and you can at least have a heads up about the people on your team, what their niches might really be. So before you start to delegate, maybe try and figure out what their niche might be, right? What makes them tick as an individual, and what makes you think that they would be a good person or a good team to delegate to, right? If you're flying blind, good luck. Yeah. But if you're right, but if we can up front start to figure out who's on my team and what it is that makes me understand that they have these strengths and these limitations, right? Because then I can start to delegate to the right people.
I like that. Ken, what were you going to add?
I was going to add that, especially for the front line and like you said, in a manufacturing type environment, what I found has worked is having different levels of training capability. So, when someone is first coming on the job, they're going to need day-to-day a lot of guidance. And, maybe, and I look at that as that might be a frontline supervisor's primary role, is to onboard new people and make sure they understand the expectations and get things set off right. But as people progress and they get more skills, they can take on potentially moving the worker from the next level. So instead of having just like, you're either qualified or not qualified, maybe you're having 2 or 3 different levels of performance. And that's a way that the frontline supervisor can delegate some of the training to some of the other team members that have already demonstrated their success. And then from an ISO perspective, that would be one of the things that we, as an auditor, you would go through and look for. And are people cross-trained? How are they doing that? How are they progressing their people? And is it all relying on one person?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. I appreciate you guys answering that question that I didn't send you ahead of time. So you had to answer on the spur of the moment. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing that, because I think it's a real question. I faced that myself. I had a manager that worked for me in the past that I thought was really good at that. And what I learned from him, so isn't that great? You can learn from people that work for you.
Yeah.
What I learned from him is don't assume that that frontline employee can't take on some delegated tasks. You know, they may be busy on the manufacturing floor, whatever they're doing, but there might be times when, think of things like maybe you have safety, some kind of safety equipment, and there's a safety, you guys have been in environments where maybe there's a safety team or something, employees are involved, and maybe there's needs to be some research about some new safety thing that comes out. I see those as really good opportunities to delegate to frontline employees. It matters to them. It's something they can be passionate about. And I had, like I said, I had that manager that was just excellent at doing that. He found the right things to delegate to those frontline employees, and they really embraced it. And I think it actually improved the teamwork because they were more engaged in the whole operation. I've been in situations before where frontline employees like that will say, my job is to come up with the problems. Your job as the manager is to fix them. And it's just like, no, that can't be the answer.
Right.
So, yeah. So thank you guys for contributing to that. So one last question I've got for you tonight. We hinted to this probably already, but I think the whirlwind to me is just another way of looking at tactics versus strategy. And I'm curious for a little bit more for your perspective. What do you think that frontline supervisor, frontline manager, what's the right balance of those two things, the tactics versus the strategy for that person?
Because I tackled this question from a more kind of the different levels of the organization, starting from the top. I would probably not expect a frontline supervisor to be spending a lot of time on strategy. About the closest thing would be, like we talked about, is that there's a goal for their department and either they or someone on their team is working on that. One of the things I found in a lot of organizations that I've been involved with is organizations are really doing annual planning versus strategic planning. They go off and they do their offsite, and it's all about what's going on now and maybe, how are we going to enter the new year? Whereas to me, strategic planning is really looking 3 to 5 years out, and you're coming up with interim goals to help you get there that will improve the organization. So I would say that the further up in the organization you go, the more you should be spending on strategy and less on tactics. And I think that goes with kind of what we had mentioned earlier. If performing within your role, I would probably say that at the VP level, if you're not spending 80% of your time on strategy, you're probably doing it wrong. And down at the department manager level, it's probably 20% of the time on strategy, and kind of graduated that way.
Yeah, I like that. I love those percentages, because I think that'd probably be, if you said what percentages would I come up with, I'd probably be about that, right in that ballpark.
And I think it comes down to some of the key things, and I think Dave mentioned part of this, but to me, it's understanding the why of the organization, understanding the clear mission and vision, having your core values, and then, as Dave said, your SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
So I kind of came at it from the same perspective, and I thought, when I remember reading David Mann's book on creating a lean culture, he called out the percentage at this level at 80%. Strict working in the process or standardized work, where the rest of it would be more of a strategic mentality. And I guess I back up from that a little bit, and I say, no, I think if I'm talking about frontline leaders, mid-level, even into mid-level managers, it really depends where you're at in the journey, in my opinion. But I think you need to be playing with the numbers of 60-40. So if you're just starting to really build a high performing team and organization at that frontline level, you probably better figure on 60% of your time being spent in the standard work medium, right? And that's executing to get those indicators. And so The other percentage of the time is strategically figuring out what tactics you're going to utilize to achieve those goals and measures. But I would also, we've talked about indicators. They talk about it a little bit in the book. One thing I'd really stress for people is when you're putting together indicators, key performance indicators is the term a lot of times used, but don't forget about those key behavioral indicators as well, and keep the number down so it doesn't start to look like static. So what are the 3 to 5 things that you can measure from a key performance perspective and a key behavioral perspective? And what are the behaviors that need to be executed to hit those objectives? Because that's what your standard work ought to be focused on, right? So if I'm that frontline leader, for instance, what are the things that I need to be doing every day as part of my regimen, right? As part of my set of habits that are, if I do that each and every day, we are going to hit those targets.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a friend of mine who was in the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps term for that is the battle rhythm. And I always just like that term. And it's the same thing you're talking about, it's that battle rhythm. If I have this great battle rhythm figured out, pretty likely, Ken, I'm going to hit the goals that you talk about that we've developed. So Ken, how about any final words that you have for the listeners tonight?
Yeah, I think, just following on what we were just talking about, I think, a lot of organizations for the day-to-day, for the whirlwind type thing, will use a balanced scorecard. And then have some project specific indicators for the goals that the organization wants to work on that are beyond the balanced scorecard. Yeah.
Dave, how about you? Last words?
So last words for me, as I read through the book or listened through the book, actually, it struck a chord with me that much like some Covey's other work, right, and others too. I don't want to just pick on Covey, but this seems to be a 4-step process to take you to the aha moment. But what I see in many of these processes is, before we start talking about step 1 of whatever the tactical process is, don't forget about what step 1 really should be, is building that team, building your people, developing your team. Because if you don't do that, I don't care what process you put in place. Just like that horse that I watched at the race this weekend that obviously trained for a short sprint, not a long race, you are going to run out of gas. You need a team. So maybe it should be 1A is build the team, and then 1B is okay, whatever your management model is.
You guys have always have really good insights. Probably my closing comment for people that are listening is, just know that you're in this whirlwind. And once you recognize that, then all of the things that we talked about, you can start to work on to find that right balance between tactic and strategy. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. And so on behalf of Ken and Dave, thank you for joining us on Leaders and Laggards, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching, and remember, leadership matters.